Hey there, it is Sunday, April 14th, 2024. I'm super excited to be back. It's been a while since I've done a live, and I apologize for that. We've been kind of remodeling the YouTube studio here and getting some stuff dialed in, and such as my ability to do this, which is kind of cool, and the ability to show the computer screen, etc. And still working on some basic details here, but we're going to get things looking pretty cool for you. Anyway, normally we go through about 10 questions, but I got a couple things I want to talk about specifically. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. So, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We are DPF Guys based in Atlanta, Georgia. Soon to be a big surprise coming up, big announcement, some other locations coming online. But wherever we are, we do focus 100% on diesel after treatment services for anything with a diesel engine and an emission system. Now, most of our customers are fleets, mechanics, owner operators of over the road equipment, but we also service after treatment for diesel passenger vehicles, off road equipment, both heavy and light. Again, that's going to be your great big caterpillars, etc., moving rocks around in a quarry, to the small stuff, the little excavators, bobcats, etc. And we also service the stuff that doesn't move, stationary equipment like generators, pumps, rock crushers, and more. So I like to say, if it has a DPF, we can clean it. Disclaimer: you should always talk to your mechanic about any concerns you have with your engine or truck, and any pricing discussed here may or may not apply to you and should only be used as a guideline and is not any form of quote uh, of services by us or anybody else, just so you know. So, what are we going to talk about today? Two things that have come up um, more frequently than I expected over the last couple of weeks while I took a break from the live. We're going to talk about two Freightliners. One of them is the Freightliner M2 box truck and the Freightliner Cascadia with the Detroit engine, specifically the 2015 vintage Cascadia. So if you don't have a Freightliner M2 or a Freightliner Cascadia 2015, and by 2015, I'm talking about second half of 2014, all of 2015, and the first half of 2016, basically the 2015 model year. You can just keep on scrolling, go watch something else. But if you do have either of those trucks or know somebody who does, hang out with me for a few minutes here. I'm going to touch on a couple of things. So buckle up. Here we go. I normally have a script for these things, but I'm going to actually just take a minute and kind of just freeform this. Um, and first, in no particular order, I want to talk about the Freightliner M2. The Freightliner M2 with the Cummins engine is going to have a Cummins 6.7. And it is, in my opinion, a decent truck. However, because of the Cummins engine, the Cummins 6.7, for whatever reason, and maybe somebody who knows more about this than I could explain why this is. So if you want to do that, please let me know. But uh, so the Cummins 6.7 and the Freightliner M2 seems to start to have the fuel injectors fail after about 250,000 miles. Now, it might be slightly before 250, slightly after 250, but I have found that you could almost set your watch to a Freightliner M2. And correct me if this is not you, but what a lot of people do is they will pick up a Freightliner M2, usually get it for a pretty good price, and immediately get an Amazon contract or something like that. And they're like, I'm going to go to work. And they drive the truck for a short amount of time, might only be a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months, and they start to get serious DPF issues. And they'll come in, and usually the DPF, the diesel particulate filter, and the DOC, diesel oxidation catalyst, will be pretty much layered up with soot. And now that can happen just over time. But with the M2, with 250,000 miles on it, what that normally tells me, if you pull up with an M2 and that thing's got 250,000 miles on it, I will tell you that yes, we will clean your DPF, but you probably almost 100% of the time need to get a six pack of injectors in that truck as well. Um, when we pull the DPF and DOC off the truck, we'll usually see a thick layer of soot. And by thick, I mean physically thick, eighth of an inch or more, which is unusual. You shouldn't see that. And we'll also 50% plus of the time, we will see a cracked DPF. Now, DPFs, diesel particulate filters, can fail, crack, breach, whatever you want to call it, bypass. That can happen just kind of randomly. But on the M2, that'll happen very, very regularly because what's happening is the fuel injectors are worn and they are dripping excessive fuel into the cylinder. And what that's doing is basically overheating the rest of the system, causing the DPF, which is quite small on an M2, to crack. When a DPF is cracked, you have two issues. One of them is the environment, which will upset Greta Thunberg,
You.
and the other is mechanical on your truck, and that will upset your SCR, your selective catalytic reducer. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds with this, but the SCR is the part of your truck that reduces NOx or nitrogen oxides, and that's what works with the DEF. And the SCR is expecting to be functioning in an environment where it does not have any soot in it, because all of that soot should have been captured upstream in the DOC, or I'm sorry, the DPF. All that should be all that soot should be captured in the DPF, and the SCR should just be dealing with clean exhaust with just the NOx in it. However, if you have a Freightliner M2 and you have injectors that are leaking fuel into the cylinders, causing it to over temperature the downstream components, which would be your DOC, your DPF, your SCR, and causing the DPF to crack, well, that soot's going to sneak through and it's going to get into the environment.
You.
And more importantly, it's going to jack up or poison your SCR, because soot will line inside your SCR and will not allow it to make contact with the exhaust properly, and will not catalyze the NOx, will not reduce the NOx, and you will start getting SCR efficiency, NOx conversion, etc. type issues as well. So if you've got a Freightliner M2 and it is a cracked DPF, you're going to probably need to clean the SCR, which is doable, and replace the DPF. And also, because that soot comes out of the engine so aggressively and with such volume, that it'll also normally face plug or put a layer of soot on the DOC as well. So, long story short, you pull up at our shop and you've got a Freightliner M2 with 250,000 miles on it. The DPF and DOC will get pulled off. We'll check them out. They're normally very dirty. If you're lucky, the DPF is very dirty but not cracked, so it can be cleaned. And we can definitely do that. However, if your engine does have injectors that are failing, and you don't replace them, you are going to be lucky if you make it 500, maybe 700 miles before your DPF and DOC is plugged up yet again. So, that being said, and if you are driving a Freightliner M2, congratulations, it's a decent truck. However, if the injectors have 250,000 miles plus or minus on them, you are probably going to replace all six of them. Now, I've had mechanics argue with me, stating that they're not getting any specific injector codes. So, how can there be an injector issue? The problem with the injectors when they go bad on this Freightliner M2 is that they go bad right at the tip, just the tip. I've been told, and there's no electronics. There's nothing that monitors that. So there's no way for the diagnostics tool, Cummins Insight or whatever you might use, to actually say, hey, this injector is overfueling. You can see the symptoms downstream. You can see that because there'll be a layer of soot on the DOC, the DPF. It'll crack the DPF oftentimes and get soot into the SCR. Or if it hasn't cracked the DPF, you can do what's called a snap acceleration test or an opacity test. And once you disconnect the downpipe from the inlet of the DOC, or pull the DOC out and just let that pipe hang out, one person gets in the truck, turns it on, one person kind of looks underneath and pedal to the metal and see if it's smoky. Oftentimes, what you'll see is a, uh, a cloud of gray or black smoke coming out, um, or you'll hear the engine, because again, you're going to go pedal to the floor. The engine may run and then all of a sudden kind of kind of bog down and then run. And that's when you hear it kind of choke a little bit. That's being caused by the fact that there's too much fuel to be properly combusted in the cylinder. It's producing a bunch of soot and smoke, and that's going into your DPF. So, Freightliner M2, 250,000 miles. You definitely want to replace the injectors uh, before you put the truck back on the road. And of course, you need the DPF cleaned. If the DPF is cracked, you'll need to get the DPF replaced. If the DOC itself will likely be layered with a layer of soot that needs to get pulled off or get cleaned off, and if your DPF is cracked and has been cracked for any period of time, your SCR, your selective catalytic reducer, which is the final canister in line here, and that will normally be plugged up with soot and will need to get cleaned out as well. Um, Now, the Freightliner M2 with the Detroit engine has a couple different configurations in the DPF system. The older ones will have everything straight in line. Boop, boop, boop. It'll be DOC, DPF, SCR, all in one nice line underneath the truck. The slightly newer ones will have them kind of stacked up above each other underneath the steps. And the newest editions will have everything is in one big stack. There's like a short, stubby DPF, a short, stubby DOC, and kind of a short, stubby SCR. So just keep in mind, you got an M2, watch the mileage, understand that you may be have to buy a 6-pack of injectors to solve the upstream issue. If you are shopping for a box truck, don't be shy about getting an M2. However, check the tailpipe to see if there's soot in the tailpipe that indicate that the DPF itself is broken and bypassing soot into the atmosphere,
You.
and the and would need to get replaced. I often tell people that if you buy a Freightliner M2, know what the truck should cost. If it does have 250,000 miles and the person selling the truck doesn't have evidence that the injectors have been recently replaced, you're going to want to take that into consideration. It's pretty typical for new injectors to go for about $500 a piece. So it's about 3 grand plus labor. Let's say it ends up being 4 or 5 grand to do injectors. Plus you might need a new DPF. That might be $1,500. And then the cleaning of the DOC and the SCR, another few $100s. So if you have a good after treatment system and have good injectors, the M2 is a great truck. It's not a big deal to fix it, but I hate to hear when somebody pays full price for an M2 that still requires, let's say $5,000-6,000 worth of work. So, in a nutshell, Freightliner M2 injectors normally need to get replaced at about 250,000 miles. If you bought an M2 with 250,000 miles on it and you don't know if the injectors have been replaced yet, they probably need to get replaced. Check the check the tailpipe, see if there's soot on the tailpipe that indicate that the DPF is breached. That's one more expense you have to take care of to replace that DPF. Also, when the injectors are going bad, the excessive soot will build up in your EGR cooler. We'll plug up your EGR cooler pressure differential, a delta P sensor that can be cleaned out. And it's all related to soot, and the soot is being caused by injectors that wear out after about 250,000 miles. So if you got an M2, come and see us. If you have any questions, please feel free to text or call DPF Guys 404-999-1361. I'd be happy to help you out. And that's really about it. Now, part 2 of our story. Remember I said I was going to talk about the 2015 Freightliner Cascadia, of course, and the as well as the M2. We covered the M2 already. And again, if you want to talk about your Freightliner M2, call or text 404-999-1361, and we can help you out. So let's talk about the 2015 Freightliner Cascadia. There's still quite a few of these trucks on the road. And it's not just the 2015 specifically, but it's the 2015 and the two bookends on that, which would be second half of 2014, beginning half of 2016. So the model year 2015. So in that model year, Freightliner Detroit, whoever you want to talk about, had an issue with the fuel mapping. And I know we talked about this before, and I think we need to talk about it, more than once to at least cover all the details here. Um, but it had an issue with fuel mapping. Now I don't know, like right to the spoonful what that actually was. However, the fuel map is the program that the engine control module or ECM uses to determine the mixture of diesel fuel and air and all that type of stuff. Like how many milliseconds does the injector inject and all of that stuff. And what was happening on the 2015, again, this is going to be if you get a 2014, 15, or 16, um, it was overfueling, and what that was doing is producing excessive heat downstream, and that was damaging the SCR, the selective catalytic reducer. It was not hurting the DOC, and oftentimes it wasn't damaging the DPF, though sometimes it did um, crack the DPF and cause soot to get in the environment.
You.
But, oftentimes the DPF is fine, the DOC is fine, it's just the SCR that's failing. Now, the reason that the DOC and DPF on these trucks would normally not be affected as much is because they can handle much higher temperatures. The SCR, the selective catalytic reducer, which is part of the one box. Again, this is on the Detroit engines on this truck, not the Cummins engine. Um, has is much less tolerant of high temperatures. The metal that's used in the SCR is vanadium, which I realize sounds like something I made up, sounds like something from the Marvel universe, like vibranium. But that's actually the catalytic metal that's in the SCR that turns the NOx emissions, the pollutants off your engine, um, turns them into nothing more than nitrogen and in water, basically. Um, and but it has a melting point of about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. So if at any point the with the fuel mapping being off, causing the downstream system to overheat, if it gets to 1200 degrees or above, that SCR is going to begin to fail because it'll start to vaporize or melt the metals out of it. Once that starts happening, the SCR will either stop working completely or will work partially. So when somebody calls me and says, "Hey, James, I've got a Freightliner Cascadia and I want to get my one box cleaned," I will ask them, "What year do they have? What year is your truck?" And they'll say 2015, they'll say 2016, they'll say 2014. And what I tell them is, "Look, I like money. I would be happy to take your money. However, let's talk more about the symptoms you are seeing." So, if you have a 2014, 15, or 16 Freightliner Cascadia with the Detroit engine, listen carefully because the symptom that you will see will be that if your truck is bobtail or if you're running your truck lightly loaded or empty on a flat road, it'll run great. No problems in the world. Good fuel economy. It's chugging right along. But you get 20, 30, 40,000 pounds in the box and you're heading uphill. All of a sudden, your lights come on and it says things like uh, poor def quality. It says things like SCR efficiency. It says things like NOx conversion. And so what do? Take it to a mechanic, take it to the dealership. They replace your outlet knock sensor. They replace your def header. They do a def quantity test. They put it in a def awning. They dump out your def and put new def in. And $3,000 later, you're no better off. Oh, in fact, you might think it's fixed because it'll pass a def quality or def, like an SCR efficiency test. Um, you're out on the road, you pull out, you pay your bill, 3,000 bucks, whatever it is to the dealership, and you take your bobtail truck down the road and you're like, man, I got this thing nailed. It's great. But the minute you pull a load up a hill or you're driving against a stiff wind, all of a sudden the lights come on and you get the same code again, which is a bummer. But uh, what that tells me, if you've got a 14, 15, or 16 Freightliner, um, cleaning the one box won't fix it, which is unfortunate. And the reason I say I don't want to take somebody's money, because even if that at that point um, the DPFs could be cleaned, it's not going to resolve this issue. So if you get a 2014, 15, or 16 Freightliner and you notice that it throws DEF quality codes, SCR efficiency, NOx conversion codes when the truck is working harder, in other words, pull a load uphill, um, I'm sorry to say that you have an SCR that has failed or failing. The only solution is to replace the one box with a new, not a used one box, because the used one box is probably no better or is even worse than the one you have. So I don't recommend a used one box. And there's no such thing as a refurbished one box. Yes, you can clean them, you can replace filters, but the SCRs are buried deep in the belly of that thing. And the only way to fix the SCR is to replace the SCR. And the only way to replace the SCR is to replace the entire one box. Anyway, so what I ask the people that call about this, and when I'm asking you, if you get a 2014, 15, or 16 Freightliner that's been giving you some of these codes, first of all, don't go down a dead end and try to chase, replacing the DEF header, all of that type of stuff, because that will not fix the issue. Um, Freightliner did issue a service bulletin on this and did an update to the software on the ECM that fixed the fuel mapping issue. Unfortunately, by the time that many people got that fix put in place, and unfortunately, by the time Freightliner found out what was wrong and released the fix and everything, the damage had already been done. Um, so you have to determine whether the problem you're having is getting worse. Is it simply a nuisance where you might need to pull over and regen your truck every couple of weeks? Maybe that's not a big deal, but oftentimes people will find that the problem will poke its head up. Um, maybe once every 2 weeks and then once every week and then a couple times a week. And then pretty soon you're spending an hour a day regenerating your truck and you definitely need a new one box. Now, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a fuel additive. In this case, it is Clean Air Fleet by our friends in La Crosse, Wisconsin, Clint and Kurt. If you do happen to have a 14, 15, or 16 Cascadia with a Detroit engine that's giving you these DEF quality and different SCR codes, again, the truck will run great if you're bobtail, but it will give you these codes if the truck is laboring, is under load heading up a hill. What I've been telling people that have been calling lately is you need a new one box. It's a not matter of if, I mean, you definitely need a new one box. But now the question is, um, can you possibly kick the can down the road a little bit and buy yourself some time before you have to replace that one box? And in theory, yes. And I have an idea for you, and it involves Clean Air Fleet, the fuel additive. Now, it could also, if you're a Pittsburgh Power user, could use Pittsburgh Power, probably get the same results. But I know you can get the results with Clean Air Fleet. Um, so what I'm getting at here is um, when your truck is lightly loaded or running bobtail, the engine's not running very hard and it's producing less emissions. It's producing less NOx. Therefore, your SCR has to work a lot less hard to try to reduce that NOx. So, let's say that if your truck is under load, they measure the NOx in parts per million. And let's say that your truck's under load and it's pumping out 300 parts per million of NOx. Again, I don't know if it's 300, 500, but somewhere in that range. And the SCR can't keep up with it. Um, and so you'll get the DEF quality code. It's saying, I'm sorry, but the SCR just can't. I'm tired. I can't keep up with all the NOx coming off of the engine. However, if you're running bobtail, you might be only pumping out 100 parts per million. And if the SCR isn't completely wiped out, completely destroyed, you're going to be, it can keep up with the NOx output. So the reason that I've been bringing up the fuel additive, again, I talk about Clean Air Fleet. It's an excellent additive. It's about 36.50 per gallon. Um, is that if you use a fuel additive such as Clean Air Fleet, and I believe that Pittsburgh Power would probably do the same thing for you, um, it actually causes the diesel fuel to burn more efficiently because the only reason that you have emissions is because the hydrocarbon, the diesel fuel, the juice that runs your truck is not burning at 100% efficiency, and it never will. But if you can get that burn more efficient, guess what happens? You are producing less emissions. You're producing less NOx, and with a good fuel additive, such as Clean Air Fleet, um, you have it'll also produce less soot. That means you have to come and see me less often because your DPF doesn't get as dirty as fast. You'll have to see me eventually, but maybe not. Instead of seeing me at 200,000 miles, maybe you come and see me at 600,000 or 700,000 miles. Um, but what I've been telling people that I have these 2014, 15, and 16 Cascadias with a one box and a Detroit engine, start using a fuel additive. I realize it's a bit of a band aid, but if it's something that can delay having to spend 9 grand on a new one box, and again, it might be 8,500, but let's say 9 grand. Um, y- that's a good thing. And maybe, just maybe, the fuel additive will actually work well enough where it'll actually prevent the problem from happening in the future. It doesn't fix it, but it buys you time. And so if you have a 2014, 15, or 16 Cascadia and you've ever had the DEF quality issue, I recommend you go out and buy a good fuel additive, such as Clean Air Fleet, which you can get from us, or if you're a Pittsburgh Power fan, start using Pittsburgh Power and see if that solves the issue. Now, a good fuel additive will also improve other conditions in your truck, such as your injectors and other things like that. So you'll get added benefits as well. But one of them is that you can put off buying a new one box for as long as possible. Anyway, so it may seem odd that I'm kind of recommending these things that actually mean that you don't have to spend money with me, but there's 3 million trucks on the road. And so if you don't have to come see me for another 6 months or a year or 2 years or even ever until you get a new truck that needs DPF cleaning, whatever it might be, that's fine. Anything you can do to help the industry is ultimately comes full circle, and we all win. So that is that. And I guess we can play this now. I hope you found that helpful. And what we're saying is if you've got a Freightliner M2, you might need new injectors. Let us help you figure that one out. If you've got a Freightliner 2014, 15, or 16, and you've ever gotten a DEF quality code, let us help you figure that out. And all you have to do is give us a call or a text at 404-999-1361. Again, that's 404-999-1361. And anyway, there you have it. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. It helps everything so much. If you can give us a thumbs up, it helps with the algorithm, helps other people find us. And please, if you have any questions um, that we can answer either immediately or in our next live, text or call us 404-999-1361. And hopefully, I'll be back here next week to answer your questions. And remember to subscribe to all the stuff. And all I can say is thanks for watching and stay tuned for next week.